Good morning. The reading this morning is called The Summer My Father Was 10, written by Brisson. It's kind of long, so bear with me. Every year, my father and I plant a garden. Tomatoes, peppers, onions, marigolds, and zinnias grow in neat, straight rows. We pull the weeds that pop up. We water, mulch, and tend it all through the summer, cutting the flowers to make bouquets for our kitchen table, or to give to Mrs. Murowski, our neighbor who broke her hip last winter and has to walk with a cane. Every spring, my father tells me about Mr. Bellavista and the summer my father was 10. Mr. Bellavista lived alone in the third-floor apartment above my father and grandmother. Plants grew all winter on his windowsill, and in the spring he trudged with a rake, garden fork, and trowel to the vacant lot next door to plant a garden. Some years he had to drag away old tires, broken bottles, and other trash before he could begin. Once his garden was planted, you could find him there nearly every morning, weeding, watering, watching over his plants. And in the evening, he would go sit on the old wooden folding chair and listen to opera on his radio. My father didn't know much about the old man, only that he always wore flannel shirts buttoned all the way up to the neck, winter or summer. He didn't talk much to other people who lived in the building, but when he did talk, his accent made his words sound strange. My father and his friends made fun of him sometimes and called him Old Spaghetti Man. Then, one August afternoon, when my father was 10, he and his friends were playing baseball near Mr. Bellavista's garden. My father's friend, Nicky, hit the ball over my father's head, and it landed in the middle of the garden. My father ran to get it and found it under a big, leafy tomato plant. The tomatoes were round and red and ripe, just about the size of a baseball. And my father thought, boy, I'd like to see Nicky's face if I threw a tomato instead of a ball, and he hit it and it splattered all over him. And so, that's what he did. And Nicky did hit it and got splattered, just like my father thought he would. And my father laughed, and Nicky chased him back into the garden and grabbed a tomato off the vine and threw it at my father. Then my father threw another one at Nicky, and then Joe threw one at Kevin. And before long, they were all throwing tomatoes and peppers at each other or batting them against the walls of the buildings, the hollow peppers thumping against the bricks, showering thin white seeds, and the pulp on the wall and ground, with the tomatoes hitting with a splat and bursting into messy globs. They even pulled up onions and the tiny flowers, swinging them around over their heads before letting them fly. They were shouting and laughing so much that they never heard Mr. Bellavista coming. But when Nicky stopped laughing and suddenly stood still, his eyes wide and staring, my father turned and saw his neighbor. He was shaking his head and saying something in Italian. He looked at the wall, splattered with tomatoes and peppers, and at my father and his friends, and he only said one word: why? My father looked at the garden, trampled and ruined, and it was only then that he realized what they had done. He looked back at Mr. Bellavista, but the old man had gone to his plants and was tenderly picking up the broken pieces, setting them in a pile at his feet. My father's friends all went away, leaving my father and Mr. Bellavista alone in the lot. My father wanted to go over and tell his neighbor he was sorry, but his feet were like heavy stones holding him there. He watched for a few minutes and then dragged himself home. The next morning, the mess had been cleared away, the ground raked smooth. There was no way to know that a garden had ever been there, but my father knew. My father's friends seemed to forget all about what they'd done, but my father couldn't forget. Every time he saw Mr. Bellavista, he remembered and wanted to tell him he was sorry, but he just couldn't make the words come out. Fall and winter came. My father went to school and played with his friends and almost forgot about what had happened. But then April came, and he remembered. He watched for signs of his neighbor getting his garden ready, but nothing happened. May came. The sun was warmer, the days were brighter, but Mr. Bellavista made no move to plant his garden. Finally, one day, when my father was going up the stairs on his way home from school, he met his neighbor coming down the stairs. Mr. Bellavista, my father began, are you going to plant a garden this year? Mr. Bellavista's eyes looked straight into my father's. So you can destroy it again? He asked. No, my father stammered. I wouldn't do that. I mean, I'm really sorry about last year. And I thought maybe I could help. Mr. Bellavista didn't say anything at first. He studied my father for a few minutes. He rubbed his jaw with the back of his hand, and then he said, Tomorrow we'll make a garden. The next day was Saturday. My father and the old man worked all day together. When they were finished, they had a patch of ground carefully raked and planted with tomato and pepper plants, teeny tiny onions, and the seeds for marigolds and zinnias. Now when my father looked at the garden, he didn't have that hard knot in his stomach. Summer came, and every morning my father and Mr. Bellavista checked their plants. My father carried water from the apartment during the dry spells and learned how to tell what was weed and what was not. When the flowers bloomed, the old man gave my father bouquets to take to my grandmother. And when the tomatoes were red and ripe, and yes, about the size of a baseball, the peppers and the onions ready, my father helped Mr. Bellavista make spaghetti sauce. And then they all ate dinner together in Mr. Bellavista's apartment and listened to opera on the radio. Every year after that, my father helped his neighbor in the garden until the spring when my father was 16 and Mr. Bellavista got sick and went to live in a nursing home. Then my father planted the garden by himself. And when the flowers bloomed, my father carried bouquets on the bus and took them to his old friend. And when the tomatoes, peppers, and onions were ready, he made spaghetti sauce and put some in the freezer and told Mr. Bellavista that they would have a spaghetti dinner when he got home. But Mr. Bellavista never did come home. And now, every year, my father and I plant a garden. Tomatoes, peppers, onions, marigolds, and zinnias in neat, straight rows. And every year, I hear the story of the summer my father visited me. And now, we get to sing again. The name of the hymn is called Earth Was Given as a Garden, which you may not know, but the tune is of Blue Boat Home, which I think you do know. So it's number 207 in the gray hymnal. If you stand as you're able and join me in singing. will make a garden. Those words spoken by Mr. Bellavista are words of forgiveness, words of trust, words of hope and promise, and words of new beginnings. I originally wrote this service with this theme to be given in the late fall, near the time of Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, the time of atonement in the Jewish New Year. But the idea of new beginnings can apply to so many points in our lives. Soon, you will be embarking on a new journey, a new beginning, as you welcome your interim minister and begin this search process for a new settled minister. It's definitely a new beginning. But every year, every season, every morning is a new beginning. We live in a world of cycles and seasons, changes that can come upon us in anticipated rhythms, or sometimes appear without warning. A garden or a life has its seasons and cycles, and so when we make a garden, when we make a life, there are inevitable changes. There are always new beginnings, new choices to make, new risks to take, new pathways that open for us. We do not have to go looking for new beginnings because they're constantly dawning in our lives. The world changes. The future emerges around us and within us, and we must respond, whether we want to be getting a new beginning right now or not. We are imperfect creatures in an imperfect world. We fall short of our goals. We lose track of our priorities. We fail to follow up on some good intentions and fall back into habits that we know don't serve us well. Choosing to make a new beginning, we wake up in the morning resolved to do better, to get back into a healthier routine, to eat a healthier diet, to pick up the pen or the paintbrush or the musical instrument and try again to bring out our creative spirit, to practice listening more deeply and strengthening our relationships. We make a new beginning. But sometimes in our lives we make mistakes. Big mistakes, not just giving up on a diet or failing to exercise. Sometimes we get caught up in something and we don't think about its consequences or its effects on others. We walk into a situation and the unexpected happens. Things go so much more wrong than we expected. It might start out with just throwing a tomato instead of a baseball, or speaking a harsh word in anger, or in making an impetuous or simply wrong decision, or not acting when you know you should. And we are left wondering, what happened? How could things have turned out the way they did? So terribly different from what I had expected. Tomorrow, we'll make a garden. When the unexpected happens, when things go wrong, we fall short, or we make a mistake in judgment, when events spiral beyond our control, we are often left with feelings of failure, blame, loss. Perhaps we're not who we thought we were. Or we point the finger, perhaps they are not who we thought they were. Maybe the world is not as we thought it was. Or in my experience, all of the above. The sense of failure and loss can be overwhelming and long-lasting. We have fallen out of covenant. The covenant we made with ourselves, the covenant we made with each other, the covenant that we made with the world or with the divine. And it's time to hope for the grace of forgiveness the grace of new beginnings. A new beginning starts with acknowledging the losses, accepting the regret, and shouldering our share of the responsibility. Not always easy, but it's a first step forward. The boy in our story overcame his fear to take the initiative to make amends. And Mr. Bella Vista, he stepped forward by allowing himself to be vulnerable and trust enough to make a garden again, this time in partnership. Tomorrow, we'll make a garden. UU minister Forrest Church wrote in his book, Love and Death, quote, "There are so many instances in our daily lives where our fears stand in the way of our potential to love. How many ways we find to armor and protect ourselves. We sense the risk, of course. That is the main reason that we act the way we do. Every time we share ourselves with another, every time we commit ourselves to a cause or a task that awaits our doing, we risk so much. We risk disappointment. We risk failure. We risk being rebuffed or embarrassed, or simply being inadequate. And beyond these things, we risk the enormous pain of loss." Unquote. So of course there is a risk in new beginnings. We have to decide the risk is worth it. The young boy and the older neighbor each took their own risk and created something of even greater value, filled with the warmth of a shared commitment, as well as the physical and spiritual nourishment of food and flowers produced by their own hands. Tomorrow, we'll make a garden. The story makes clear that it's a lot of work to plant a garden. It takes all we have. It takes our mind, our heart, our will to move with all our presence into this new beginning, so that we make the most of the opportunity to create something strong and good in our fresh start. Otto Scharmer, a scholar at MIT in organizational leadership, teaches a strategy that he calls leading into the future as it emerges. A key to moving into a place of better understanding, Scharmer says, is approaching life with an open mind, an open heart, and an open will. The open mind admits new understandings. The open heart, a new appreciation of others. And the open will permits us to be called into relationships in new ways. This particularly resonated with me, as it seems to align with the covenant that UUs all across this country recite together on Sunday mornings. A covenant to truth, love, and service. Head, heart, will. These are the resources that we bring to each new beginning. Tomorrow, we'll make a garden. Thank heavens for new beginnings, for the first day of anything, for New Year's resolutions, for the second chance or third or fourth. But I don't want my new beginnings to get too hung up on all the should-haves. I am pretty good at dating all the things I should do. I should exercise more and eat less. I should volunteer more of my time. You know, the list is long. I have an abundant supply of guilt. But sometimes I lose track of what I want to do versus what I should do. Or at least I get them confused. How different it might be if rather than making resolutions based on loss or should-haves, we made our resolutions based on the grand vision of what we can do together. resolving to create more health, more love, more happiness for ourselves, but even more importantly, for others. To live and work with an open mind, to approach others with an open heart, and use our hands for a will to give more opportunities to others. Tomorrow, we'll make a garden. What in your life calls for new or renewed commitment as we make our commitments for each new year, each new season, and each new morning? Where will we dare to risk, dare to learn something new, dare to be open in partnering with others to create something of greater value in our lives? Where will we resolve and commit to some new beginning in our lives, not because we should, not from a place of obligation, but with hope for a new joy? In each of our lives, we choose what sort of garden we will make, how we will tend it, and in the cycles and seasons of life, what we will make of each new beginning. I hope I'm not making this sound easy. I'm not sure that in my life there has been anything harder than embracing a new beginning. I have not been full of joy as I struggle toward creating new beginnings in my life. I still mourn my old life. When I built that life around my complete family, I have lost one son. I mourn the life when the seasons involved watching both of my boys grow. But no matter our past, we always must build for new beginnings as we vision our future. It's not a question of easy or hard. It's simply necessary for a meaningful life. Tomorrow, we'll make a garden. Together in this faith community, you also make a garden. You commit your life here together to grow a community of faith and action, something precious and always in need of renewing. You are challenged to take risks in that partnership, in the growing of that garden, in your work to make this congregation strong and people strive to create something of value together, especially now in your time of transition. As with individual lives, I assume the going has not always been smooth, and there have been times of disagreement or discord when people have been challenged to find new ways to work together to make this garden. But there is much good work to be done. With open minds and heart and will, you will engage that work together for the future of this community. It's good, complex, and compelling work. You risk a lot. You risk disappointment. You risk conflict. You risk being inadequate. But the reward if you take the risk is the joy of knowing that we are creating a new beginning for something truly important in the world. And so, new beginnings are always upon us. Once again, here they come. In this time of marking another summer, of renovating your house of worship, of starting yet again with new leadership, you acknowledge the risk, and maybe it's time to make your mid-year's resolutions. Commit to making a garden again and again as the cycles and seasons roll over you. This morning and all mornings tomorrow and all tomorrows. Let this be a time of new beginnings. Together, we'll make a garden. Blessed be, and amen.
Thank you, Rebecca. We appreciate and honor your sharing today. Now we come to a time where we share our gifts that we have been given to the work of this congregation and to our community. Our community share plate partner this year, this Sunday, is the Family Food Center in Flagstaff. And we have special music by Andy today. He's sharing one of my daughter's favorite songs, the Garden Song.
It says on the order of service this was by Pete Seeger, and that's who I learned it from, but the original song was actually by Dave Mallet. Pete modified it as in the good old folk tradition, and I've made some modifications and added a verse of my own. For those of you who are maybe familiar with it, please sing along on the choruses. I'll introduce the chorus first. One of the changes I've made is it says inch by inch, row by row, gonna make this garden grow. Well, if you're a gardener, you know we don't really make a garden grow. Growth is that mysterious force in nature that nobody really understands, but it's why we're here. And so I call it gonna help this garden grow, because that's what we do, and we help each other grow. So. Inch by inch, row by row, gonna help this garden grow. Gonna mulch it deep and low, gonna make it fertile ground. Inch by inch, row by row, please bless these seeds I sow. Please keep them safe below till the rains come tumbling down. Pulling weeds, picking stones, we are made of dreams and bones. Need a spot to call my own, for the time is close at hand. Grain for grain, sun and rain, find my way in nature's chain. Tune my body and my brain to the music of the land. Inch by inch, row by row, gonna help this garden grow. Gonna mulch it deep and low, gonna make it fertile ground. Inch by inch, row by row, please bless these seeds I sow. Please keep them safe below till the rains come tumbling down. Plant your rose short or long, seasoned with a prayer of song. Mother Earth will keep you strong if you give her loving care. Old crow watches from a tree, God is hungry, eye on me. In my garden I'm as free as that feathered thief up there. Inch by inch, row by row, gonna help this garden grow. Gonna mulch it deep and low, gonna make it fertile ground. Inch by inch, row by row, please bless these seeds I sow. Please keep them safe below till the rains come tumbling down. All alone, out in space, the vessel of the human race. So fragile yet so full of grace, this planet is our home. Step by step, hand in hand, we can start to heal the land. We can start to understand that the earth and we are one. Inch by inch, row by row, this garden grow. Gonna mulch it deep and low, gonna make it fertile ground. Inch by inch, row by row, please bless these seeds I sow. Please keep them safe